I'm taping this on the morning of Thursday, November 30th. Tomorrow, December 1st, is World AIDS Day, and 10 days or so ago, UNAIDS, the coordinating body of the UN that handles the UN family's response to AIDS, and a lot more than that around the world, UNAIDS published a report called Right to Health. Now, I expected the usual run of soporific banalities, but you can imagine, therefore, my surprise and gratification when I looked at the report and realized that it's a first-rate document. It's extremely well written, it's really very interesting, it's quite analytic in places, and much more comprehensive and thoughtful than the normal run of UN material. As a matter of fact, it deals through the first third of the volume with the sort of social determinants of the pandemic, the questions of gender inequality and human rights and poverty and access to medicines and the health systems to explain the response to HIV. And it has as well a number of nuggets of approach which are really interesting. For example, it looks at disability in HIV through the eyes of a young girl who is deaf in Zimbabwe. And it looks at child marriage and the transmission of the virus through the eyes of a young woman in Afghanistan. And it looks at issues of street children and the internally displaced and refugees through an NGO called The Way Home in Odessa, in the Ukraine. And it covers absolutely everything from sexual violence through to key populations, as they're called, gay men and other men who have sex with men, and sex workers and injecting drug users and prison populations. And it covers community health workers and it covers youth. It's an entire encyclopedia, but it does it thoughtfully rather than simply statistically or methodically. And in addition to that, it has right at the center of the report a fascinating, if pot-boiled, history of the highs and lows of the pandemic, going right back to the early days of the gay community in San Francisco and New York, through the treatment action campaign in South Africa, right to the current day. In fact, the whole report shows how the people living with HIV, those who were and are infected, are the people who've been carrying on the fight for change. It's really excellent. And of course, the centerpiece is the point that 21 million people are now in treatment. They have a right to feel very good about that, but they concede that there are still 15 to 16 million people who require treatment. And close to 2 million people were infected last year, and 1 million died. And AIDS is still the greatest single killer of women of reproductive age. They define that between 15 and 49. And the toll amongst adolescent girls, hundreds of thousands. As a matter of fact, they have an arithmetic formula which is really unsettling. They say that every 4 minutes, 3 young girls are newly infected. Every 4 minutes, 3 young girls are newly infected. And they touch on the discrimination against children as compared to adults. And of course, they also deal with the co-infection of tuberculosis and HIV, pointing out that tuberculosis is the AIDS-related illness which kills most people. And then, I hope you don't think this is a terrible conflict of interest, they also deal with orphans extensively, and particularly with the fact that it's the grandmothers who are looking after the orphans. And in a fashion I've never seen before, they have a photograph of this book in the report. It's called Powered by Love. It's a book which my foundation published very, very recently on the grandmothers campaign between Canadian grandmothers and African grandmothers, showing the importance of the African grandmothers in their struggle for human rights and looking after orphan grandchildren. And if you'll forgive that conflict of interest, it isn't the reason for this commentary, but I just want to emphasize that good reports in the UN are few and far between. They're normally self-congratulatory extensions of the leadership. Not in this case. Go to the UNAIDS website. Read it for yourself. That was last week. I'm Stephen Lewis.